You've applied for a job and maybe even interviewed for the job. It's an entry-level position that you're trying to get, so you know there will be lots of other people applying for that position. Competition for that position will be tough. So how do you show that you are interested in the job and you want it more than the other applicants? That's what we're talking about on this week's episode. It is the week of March 30th through April 3rd, and this is the QC Step podcast. Welcome to this week's episode of the QC Step podcast. I'm Corey Finneran. I mentioned this last week, but some of you were on spring break. I'm sure you've noticed the weather is warming up, and that means that more businesses are hiring. Businesses are already hiring for summer jobs. Some of these job openings are listed in the newspaper. Some of them are on job websites like Indeed.com, and some are in the hidden job market. And you might be wondering what the hidden job market is. These are job openings that aren't listed anywhere. You can find them by going into businesses and asking if they are hiring, or you can find them by networking. If you have friends that are working, ask them if their employer is hiring. Those are the hidden jobs, and that's the hidden job market that you will want to try to find. I read that 80% of all job openings are not advertised. I'm continuing to work my way through questions from you and your classrooms, and this week I have a question from a student at Rock Island High School. And this student asks, how can you show you are interested in the job and that you want it more than the other applicants? That's a great question, and as I said at the beginning of this episode, typically there are many applicants for entry-level positions, which makes competition really tough. So to get the job, you're going to have to stand out and show that you want it more than the others. So how do you do that? That's the question. So let's start at the beginning of the application process. How do you show that you want it more than other applicants with your application? Well, when you pick up an application, dress like you're there for an interview. Be polite, introduce yourself, and maintain good eye contact throughout the process. If you want to stand out from other applicants, you need to do it from the beginning, and be prepared for any opportunity that you might have to set yourself apart. If you go in to pick up an application and the hiring manager is present, introduce yourself and tell them why you want to work there or why you think you would be a good employee. Most teenagers that pick up applications aren't going to be prepared with their elevator speech. We've talked about elevator speeches or elevator pitches on several episodes here on the podcast. If you're not sure what that is, you can go back to episode number 56. That was last school year. But in that episode, I give you some tips on creating your own elevator speech. And when you go pick up an application, that's a perfect opportunity to use it. Picking up an application will be that business's first impression of you. And by doing these things, you will show that you are interested in the job and that you want it more than other applicants. When filling out the application, fill it out neatly and thoroughly. Make sure that you have all the information correct. If the application asks for 3 references, make sure that you have 3 to put down. Take your time and do it right. Do the application in blue ink or black ink. And take your time and make sure that you don't make any mistakes. I would suggest picking up 2 applications. That way, if you mess one up, you have another one there. Or if you get an application, take it to school and ask a teacher to make a copy for you. That's for paper applications, of course. If you're filling out an online application, take your time. Don't try to do an online application on your own. Ask a teacher or Gary or Carrie for help with online applications. You don't want the application to be the end of the road in your attempt to get hired by a business. So now let's look at what you can do to stand out in an interview. First off, dress appropriately for the interview. If you aren't dressed appropriately, you're not going to impress anyone, and you're not going to convince them that you really want the job and that you want it more than your competition. Be prepared with your answers. If you really want the job, then do as many mock interviews with as many different people as you can. Be prepared for anything. Watch all of the QC Step podcast episodes on interviewing. You can get to them by going to qcstep.com and clicking on this image right here. You're not going to be able to breeze into the job search, the application, or the interview and just act like you want it more than your competition. You're going to have to actually show that you want it more by doing the important things and putting in the time to be as prepared as possible. I could also talk about what could set you apart from your competition when it comes to following up after your interview, but I'm going to save that for next week. Next week, we're going to look at how to follow up after you turn in an application and how to follow up with an employer after you've had an interview with them. So if you want the job more than anyone else, let it show. If you aren't more prepared than your competition, then you don't want it more. If you don't dress appropriately, then your competition wants it more than you do. If you don't go above and beyond what a typical applicant does to try to get the job, it's difficult to convince a business that you want the job more than the other people that are interviewing, the people interviewed right before you and the people that are interviewing after you. So demonstrating that you want the job is up to you. You can connect with QC Step on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can find those links right here at the top of qcstep.com. I use those to share articles and videos on employment, as well as other employment and job-seeking tips. Thank you for watching and listening, and we'll be back next week with another episode of the QC Step Podcast.